The roar of the crowd had barely faded, yet the storm brewing behind the scenes was far from over. Who was the man beneath the paint, the intensity, the seemingly unstoppable force? Was he a hero, a visionary, or someone whose own demons were quietly unraveling the life he had built?
I mean, he was the world champion, but that was short-lived. Because literally, like 2 months after, 𝗗𝗜𝗣𝗣𝗦𝗡 left and Ultimate Warrior came home.
As the spotlight moved on, whispers of conflict, betrayal, and personal struggle began to surface. The Ultimate Warrior had conquered arenas, but could he conquer the turmoil that followed him beyond the ropes? Tonight, we peel back the layers, exposing the triumphs, the controversies, and the shadowy corners of a life lived at full speed, yet dangerously close to the edge. They called him the Ultimate Warrior, a storm wrapped in muscle, paint, and madness.
Ultimate Warrior, you've heard from Andre the Giant and Bobby the Brain Heenan. They believe, Warrior, that they...
But before the face paint, before the roaring entrances and shaking ropes, he was simply a boy named 𝗗𝗜𝗣𝗣𝗠𝗏. Born in Crawfordsville, Indiana, on June 16, 1959, Jim grew up in a small, quiet town that never guessed it would raise one of wrestling's most intense icons. He was shy, wiry, almost fragile at first, the oldest of 5 children in a family marked by instability. His father left when he was 12. His mother tried her best, holding the family together, while young Jim found refuge in one thing: discipline, weights, iron control. In the clanging rhythm of barbells, he found something solid in a life that felt uncertain. He wasn't chasing fame yet. He was chasing strength, not just physical, but the kind that could keep people from ever walking away again. By high school graduation, his body had already begun to change. He studied anatomy and nutrition obsessively, and when others were out celebrating, Jim spent hours under flickering gym lights, lifting until his hands split. People whispered that he was obsessed. Maybe he was. But in that obsession, the seeds of the Ultimate Warrior were quietly taking root. College didn't hold him for long. He tried it, then drifted into bodybuilding, chasing that same perfect form. California became his new arena, the mecca of muscle. Under the blazing sun of Venice Beach, surrounded by the scent of tanning oil and ambition, Jim carved himself into something mythic. He competed, posed, smiled for cameras. But even there, among the sculpted elite, he stood apart. There was an energy to him, something barely contained, a storm behind the eyes. Trainers noticed. They said he didn't just lift weights, he attacked them. Every rep looked like a battle between will and limit. And yet, bodybuilding was too quiet for him. There were no crowds to roar, no adrenaline to chase. He wanted more, something that could match the chaos inside. In 1985, fate walked through the gym door in the form of a man named Rick Bassman, a promoter looking for recruits for his new wrestling school, Power Team USA. Bassman saw Jim's physique and said only one word: perfect. Jim agreed to train, alongside other hopefuls, including a tall, blonde Californian named Steve Borden. Together, they would debut as a tag team called the Freedom Fighters. Later, fans would know Borden as Sting. In those early days, they were rookies, raw, hungry, and clueless about the pain that came with chasing glory in the squared circle. The pay was bad, the travel endless, the injuries constant. But Jim didn't care. He fed on it. Each bump, each bruise, seemed to carve the mask he would one day wear. By 1986, the duo split. Sting found his own path. Jim reinvented himself, briefly wrestling as the Dingo Warrior in Texas. There, under dim lights and smoky arenas, the legend began to stir. Promoters noticed his intensity, the wild hair, the fiery eyes, the way he charged into the ring like a man possessed. Crowds didn't understand him, but they couldn't look away. He wasn't just wrestling, he was transforming. Then the call came. The World Wrestling Federation, Vince McMahon's empire, was looking for new stars. 𝗗𝗜𝗣𝗣𝗦𝗡 was about to step into immortality. When he entered the WWF locker room in 1987, everything changed. The paint came first, bright neon stripes that turned his face into a living mask. Then the armbands, the wild tassels, the frenetic sprint to the ring. When his music hit, it was like lightning striking a crowd of thousands. He didn't just walk to the ring, he exploded toward it, shaking the ropes with such violence it looked like he might rip them apart. Commentators screamed, fans lost their minds, and the myth of the Ultimate Warrior was born. He wasn't the best technical wrestler, but he didn't need to be. His power was emotional, primal. Kids idolized him. Adults couldn't quite explain him. There was something supernatural about the man, something beyond logic or language. He spoke in riddles about warriors, gods, and the universe. Backstage, many rolled their eyes. But when the cameras were on, those words became gospel to millions. 1988 to 1990, the Golden Ascent. The warrior tore through opponents like a force of nature. Each victory added to his myth, each entrance louder than the last. Hulk Hogan was still the face of the company, but the warrior was its heart. A pulsing, unpredictable energy the fans could feel in their bones. At WrestleMania 6 in 1990, Toronto's Sky Dome trembled. Warrior versus Hogan, champion versus champion. Two titans, each representing a different kind of power. Hogan's charisma against Warrior's chaos. When Warrior pinned Hogan clean in the center of the ring, 67,000 fans erupted. The torch had been passed. The Warrior stood atop the turnbuckle, clutching both belts, neon paint smeared by sweat and tears. For one breathtaking moment, he was untouchable. But legends burn bright, and bright flames rarely last. Behind the scenes, cracks began to show. Warrior's intensity wasn't an act, it was his reality. He demanded perfection from himself, and from everyone else. He argued with management, questioned storylines, refused to compromise. Some called him passionate, others difficult. Vince McMahon saw money in him, but he also saw volatility. The same energy that made Warrior a superstar made him unpredictable. Warrior wanted creative control, a dangerous demand in the world of professional wrestling. He wanted to define his character, write his promos, shape his destiny. But in the tightly controlled empire of the WWF, there was only one true power, and it wasn't the Warriors. Tensions exploded in 1991, right before SummerSlam. Warrior, feeling underpaid and under-respected, sent McMahon a letter demanding better compensation. It wasn't a request, it was an ultimatum. He wrestled that night alongside Hogan, and the moment the match ended, McMahon suspended him. Some say Vince fired him right after he walked through the curtain. Others say Warrior stormed out. Either way, the myth began to crumble. To the fans, the disappearance was shocking. To those backstage, it was inevitable. The man who seemed superhuman had collided with human limits: ego, exhaustion, pride. For months, the Warrior vanished. No interviews, no appearances, just silence. Rumors spread. Had he retired? Was he blacklisted? Some even claimed the original Warrior had died and been secretly replaced. A bizarre conspiracy that would haunt his legacy for years. When he finally returned in 1992, he looked different, leaner, older, changed. The audience cheered, but the magic felt thinner. There was a shadow now, a hint of something broken. And inside him, the storm only grew darker. Behind the paint, Jim Hellwig was wrestling not opponents, but identity. He wasn't sure where the character ended and the man began. Friends would later say he could flip between the two mid-sentence. Soft-spoken one moment, shouting about cosmic destiny the next. That intensity, once his greatest weapon, became his curse. His second WWF run ended as abruptly as it began. Disagreements, missed shows, accusations. It was chaos again. McMahon cut ties for good. By the mid-90s, the world had moved on. New stars rose, the business changed, and the Warrior, in the brightest flame of them all, seemed extinguished. But legends rarely fade quietly. Somewhere in Arizona, far from the lights and the crowds, 𝗖𝗓𝗣𝗑𝗧 began rebuilding. He trained, lectured, opened a gym, and wrote about philosophy, his own brand of self-belief called 𝗓𝗓𝗣𝗓𝗏. It was half motivational, half spiritual, and entirely warrior. Fans didn't always understand it, but it gave him purpose. After years of being controlled by promoters and scripts, he was finally writing his own story. Still, the ghosts of the ring never left him. The cheers, the adrenaline, the immortality, they echoed in every quiet moment. He often said, "A warrior never truly retires. He just fights different battles." And soon, those battles would pull him back to the very stage that once consumed him. But with every comeback, every flash of paint and muscle, something inside him was changing. The fire was still there, but beneath it, exhaustion. Behind the grin, sorrow. Behind the myth, a man who wasn't sure how much longer he could keep the mask on. The warrior's return was coming, and with it, the beginning of an ending no one could have predicted. When the lights of the wrestling world shone on him again, 𝗖𝗓𝗣𝗑𝗧 looked like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. 1996, the World Wrestling Federation called once more. The company was losing its grip on an audience hungry for something new, and Vince McMahon believed that maybe, just maybe, the warrior could spark that fire again. But time changes everything. The era of the superhero muscle gods was ending. The new generation was sharper, more cynical. When the warrior burst through the curtain after years away, the roar was there, but different. It was a cheer for nostalgia, not for conquest. He sprinted. He shook the ropes, he screamed. Yet for a flicker of a second, behind the neon mask, there was weariness. The kind that comes from carrying a legend too heavy for mortal shoulders. His comeback feud with Hunter Hearst Helmsley was supposed to be the start of a new chapter. Instead, it showed the cracks. He beat his opponent in mere minutes, ignoring the careful plans laid by management. Backstage, frustration boiled. Producers called him uncooperative. He said he was protecting the warrior's spirit. The tension that had once ended his first run began to repeat itself like a curse. By the summer of '96, he was gone again, fired, suspended, depending on who told the story. Officially, the company cited missed shows due to family issues. Unofficially, whispers said he simply couldn't live in two worlds anymore. 𝗖𝗓𝗣𝗑𝗧, husband and father, and the ultimate warrior, demigod of the squared circle. He retreated into silence. Fans were left with nothing but rumors and blurry convention photos. Some said he was bitter. Others claimed he had found peace. The truth was stranger than both. In the Arizona desert, the man once drenched in spotlights built a fortress of solitude, literally. A home lined with motivational quotes, painted symbols, and gym equipment. He filled notebooks with thoughts about life, legacy, and destiny. He recorded long monologues, his voice still booming, but now directed toward philosophy instead of promos. He called his creed 𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓, a fusion of destruction and truth. To outsiders, it sounded mad. To him, it was salvation. It was his way to stitch the torn halves of himself back together. He toured small expos, meeting fans who still called him warrior. He'd grip their hands, stare into their eyes, and tell them to live fearlessly. Some walked away, inspired. Others walked away shaken, as if they'd met a preacher more than a wrestler. Years passed. The wrestling world moved into new ages, attitude, ruthless aggression, and the warrior became a legend told in past tense. New fans only knew him through grainy footage on VHS tapes. Old fans argued online about his legacy. Some called him an egomaniac, others a misunderstood visionary. But the man himself stayed a ghost, emerging only for occasional interviews, often fiery, sometimes strange, always unforgettable. He spoke against the business that made him, accusing it of exploiting souls. And yet, deep down, the ring still called to him. By the early 2000s, he began to appear at conventions again, this time with long gray hair and a calm demeanor. The wild man of the ropes had become a philosopher of memory. He'd tell stories about paint and passion, then fall silent for long stretches, lost somewhere between pride and regret. Fans noticed the contradictions. One moment he'd praise his old rivals, the next, he'd condemn them. It was as if he was fighting ghosts that only he could see. Then, in 2008, a flicker of the old warrior returned. He wrestled one final match in Spain. A brief, chaotic burst of color and fury, almost symbolic. The entrance alone brought tears to fans' eyes. The match itself didn't matter. It was the gesture, a warrior saluting his own myth before the curtain finally fell. Afterward, he walked backstage, heart pounding, sweat stinging his eyes, and said quietly, "I did it. One last time." No one realized how final those words would sound in hindsight. The years that followed were quieter, but strangely warm. He focused on family, raising his daughters with the same intensity he once brought to the ring. He painted with them, told them stories about heroes and courage, and often reminded them that their father had once been a man who ran into arenas filled with fire. But every now and then, when the night grew still, the warrior would return, alone, in his private gym, lifting in silence until dawn. He could never quite let go. In 2013, something shifted. The WWE, now a polished global corporation, began reaching out to mend old wounds with its estranged legends. They had brought back Bruno Sammartino, Bret Hart, even the volatile Hulk Hogan. There was one more name on the list: the Ultimate Warrior. For years, the company had distanced itself from him. They'd produced a controversial DVD portraying him as erratic and unstable. Fans thought reconciliation was impossible. But time, they say, softens even the hardest edges. So when the call came, Warrior listened. The voice on the other end offered peace, an induction into the WWE Hall of Fame. Not as Jim Hellwig, not as the man behind the paint, but as the symbol that had inspired millions. He hesitated. Could he forgive the same machine that once crushed him? Could he return, older and mortal, to the empire that had moved on without him? After long nights of thought, he agreed. Not for fame, not for money, but for closure. For his daughters, who had never seen the arenas filled with his name. For the fans, who still believed in the warrior spirit. April 2014, WrestleMania weekend, the return of a ghost. When the Hall of Fame ceremony began, no one knew what to expect. Would he rant? Would he forgive? When the Ultimate Warrior stepped onto that stage, dressed in a crisp suit, long hair tied back, tears in his eyes, the crowd rose to its feet. Chants of "Warrior, Warrior" shook the walls. He paused, overwhelmed. For the first time in decades, the mask slipped, and the man smiled. He spoke softly, thanking the fans, the wrestlers, even Vince McMahon. He said he finally understood that the warrior belonged to everyone. The myth was bigger than him. The next night, at Monday Night Raw, he walked to the ring one last time. The crowd erupted as his music hit. The same pounding beat, the same surge of nostalgia. But this time, his stride was slower, his face graver. He put on the paint once more and took the microphone. His final promo was haunting. He spoke about every man's heart beating its final beat, about the spirit of the warrior living on in the fans who believed. "You are the legend," he said, pointing to the audience. "The spirit of the Ultimate Warrior will run forever." No one realized they were hearing a eulogy. The next evening, April 8, 2014, Jim Hellwig collapsed outside his hotel. He was pronounced dead at age 54. The cause, a sudden heart attack. Just 24 hours after his farewell speech. The world stopped. News outlets scrambled. Fans flooded social media, replaying his eerie words from the night before. Some said he had predicted his death. Others called it coincidence. But deep inside the hearts of those who had followed his journey, there was an understanding. He had known. Somehow he had felt the curtain closing. Vince McMahon wept on camera. Wrestlers from every generation. For years, fans have debated what really happened that night. Was it stress, genetics, or fate? Did he push himself too hard for one last stand? No autopsy report could capture what truly stopped his heart. Some say it wasn't failure, it was fulfillment. The warrior had done what he was meant to do, burn brighter than anyone else, even if only for a moment. He left behind his wife, Dana, and 2 daughters, and courage beyond the ring. The crowd that once screamed his name now speaks it in reverence. Children who became myth, memory, and moral all at once. And somewhere, in the echo of every arena, when the lights dim and the crowd waits for that first hit of music, you can almost feel it. The tremor of footsteps, the whisper of tassels, the heartbeat of the ultimate warrior running once more. The world saw him as a hero, a titan of energy, who shook the ropes and screamed against the limits of mortal men. But behind the paint, there lived a man who could never stop hearing the echoes of that roar. Even when the arena went silent, the sound followed him. In the dark corners of hotel rooms, in the restless hours before dawn. After the 2014 Hall of Fame ceremony, millions celebrated his redemption arc. The fallen warrior returning home, finally embraced by the kingdom that once cast him out. But deep inside, Jim Hellwig was fighting his most personal and invisible battle. The cameras showed smiles, laughter, nostalgia. But when they turned off, he sat quietly, breathing hard, as if every heartbeat carried the weight of unfinished truths. Those close to him recall subtle signs, fatigue, shortness of breath, and quiet moments of reflection where he'd stare into space as though reading something written on the horizon. His wife, Dana, later said he had grown strangely philosophical. He spoke of closure, of destiny, of finishing stories. He talked about completing the circle. But the circle of the ultimate warrior had always been tangled in controversy. His relationships with other wrestlers were often fractured, born from pride, wounded by misunderstanding. Many saw him as arrogant, uncooperative, unwilling to bend. Others said he was simply misunderstood, a man who believed too deeply in the myth he created. In the late 80s and early 90s, locker room whispers followed him like shadows. Some wrestlers resented his meteoric rise, claiming he hadn't earned his spot the traditional way. Hulk Hogan, the golden hero before him, once said in interviews that Warrior didn't play politics, he just ran through them. And in that industry, that was both admirable and dangerous. The very thing that made him iconic, his intensity, also made him isolated. He lived in extremes, either adored or despised, never neutral. Fans remember him as a comic book god brought to life, but his peers often saw a man possessed by his own creation. After he left WWE, lawsuits followed, disputes over character ownership, unpaid royalties, and the right to use the name Warrior. In 1993, he legally changed his name from James Bryan Hellwig to simply Warrior. It wasn't a stage gimmick anymore, it was identity. It was as if Jim had vanished, leaving only the spirit. His critics said he was delusional. His supporters said he was devoted. But no one could deny his conviction. He began giving lectures, long, fiery speeches to college audiences about self-belief and masculinity. The messages were raw, passionate, sometimes controversial. He spoke about personal responsibility and strength, but his tone was often harsh, his ideas extreme. Some of his remarks sparked outrage. They were labeled as offensive or intolerant. Overnight, the man once known for uniting fans under his war paint became the target of online storms. The media called him erratic. Others claimed he was simply speaking his truth in an age afraid of bluntness. Whatever the intent, the damage to his public image was real. The Ultimate Warrior became a symbol torn between admiration and accusation. The same man who once preached "believe in yourself" was now drowning in the noise of criticism. And yet, those close to him say he never stopped believing in his mission. His wife described him as intense even in silence. A man who would wake before sunrise, write for hours, lift weights, then sit staring into the desert sky. He talked about mortality often. He told her, "If I die tomorrow, know that I lived as the warrior. No regrets." Then came the eerie foreshadowing. In the weeks before his death, Warrior began speaking about legacy as if rehearsing for a final curtain. In his last recorded interviews, he repeated the phrase, "Every man's heart beats its final beat." Those words, now immortal, weren't just poetic, they were prophetic. People who met him that weekend noticed his appearance, tired eyes, pale complexion. Still, he powered through, greeting fans, smiling, shaking hands with old rivals. When he hugged Vince McMahon backstage after years of animosity, witnesses said it felt like a movie ending. Decades of bitterness, melting in a single embrace. But some said there was a heaviness in his energy, a sense of goodbye. He signed autographs, took pictures, then whispered to a staff member, "I'm glad this story is complete." After his speech on Monday Night Raw, he walked backstage exhausted. He told his wife he felt drained but peaceful. They returned to their hotel in Scottsdale. The next day, while walking with her, he clutched his chest and fell. The world that once watched him run to the ring now watched the news ticker flash. The Ultimate Warrior dead at 54. The shock rippled across generations. Social media exploded. Fans replayed his last promo, that haunting message about mortality, over and over, as if trying to decode a farewell message hidden in plain sight. The conspiracy whispers began almost immediately. Some called it coincidence, others destiny. A few believed he somehow knew. That the energy he carried for years, the heart that raced through thousands of entrances, had finally burned out at the exact moment his story reached peace. The warrior had always blurred the line between man and myth. And in death, that line vanished completely. The company that once distanced itself from him now immortalized him. Murals, documentaries, awards. The Warrior Award was introduced to honor those who demonstrate strength and perseverance, the same qualities he embodied and sometimes fought against. His name became inspiration again, but behind the celebration, there lingered an ache. Because every story of greatness carries a shadow, and the warrior's shadow was long. Over time, revelations emerged about his fragile health. Years of intense training, constant adrenaline, and emotional strain had taken their toll. Some insiders spoke of untreated hypertension, others hinted at genetic heart issues. But no official theory could fully explain the poetic precision of his timing. His death just one day after his speech about final heartbeats. For fans, the loss felt personal. They had grown up painting their faces, running through living rooms, mimicking his energy. When he died, a part of their childhood went with him. For the wrestling world, it was more than nostalgia. It was the loss of a symbol. Because love him or hate him, you remembered him. You couldn't ignore the Ultimate Warrior. He was chaos and charisma, thunder and silence. The documentary lens pans across decades of footage. The wide-eyed intensity, the neon colors, the shaking ropes, the clenched fists. A man who lived like an explosion and died like an echo. To some, he was reckless. To others, revolutionary. But to everyone, he was unforgettable. Behind the myth, there was always Jim, a boy from Indiana who dreamed of greatness, who built himself into something more than human, and who paid the price for touching immortality. His final message remains his truest legacy. The spirit of the Ultimate Warrior will run forever. And so, every time a young fan steps into a gym, every time a wrestler paints their face, every time someone refuses to quit no matter how broken they feel, that spirit runs again. The Ultimate Warrior didn't just perform, he transcended. He didn't just live, He symbolized what it means to fight until your heart gives everything it has. And even in death, he won. Because legends don't fade, they transform, and the warrior became eternal. The ultimate warrior never truly died. He just ran beyond the ropes, into forever. The lights of the arena dimmed as the crowd waited, an electric hum of anticipation filling the air. For decades, he had been a figure of raw energy, a whirlwind of colors and chaos that seemed almost otherworldly. 𝗖𝗢𝗣𝗬𝗥𝗚𝗛𝗧, the man behind the face paint, the persona of the ultimate warrior, had always been a storm. Unpredictable, larger than life, and yet deeply human beneath the layers of painted fury. Now, in these final appearances, there was a quiet weight to him, a sense that the fire might finally be nearing its last flare. It was a Monday night, 2 days after the Hall of Fame induction, that had crowned him with a long overdue recognition. He had stood there in front of thousands, acknowledging the applause, the admiration, the almost mythic status that fans had bestowed upon him. For many, the ultimate warrior had always been a symbol of strength, a hero to emulate, a larger-than-life figure ripped straight from the pages of comic books. But for 𝗖𝗢𝗣𝗣𝗬𝗥, the man, it had always been something more fragile, more complicated. This was not just a celebration of a career, it was a moment of reconciliation. A final piece with a life that had been as tumultuous as it was brilliant. The journey to this moment had been anything but straightforward. Warrior's career had been defined by explosive energy, by awe-inspiring performances that often masked his insecurities, his self-doubts, the lingering shadows of a childhood punctuated by abandonment. The small Indiana town where he grew up had never fully understood him. When his father left, a chasm opened in his young life, and in that space, Warrior had built a fortress, one of sheer willpower, one of relentless intensity, one that would later allow him to channel every ounce of frustration into the persona that the world came to know. Every sprint to the ring, every clothesline, every roar into the microphone was not just performance, it was catharsis, a release of all that unresolved emotion, a declaration to the world that he existed, that he mattered, that he would not be forgotten. The final weeks before his death were a whirlwind. Warrior had returned to the ring, reconnecting with fans who had loved him since the late 1980s. His energy, though tinged with age and years of physical toll, was still magnetic. Children waved action figures bearing his likeness. Fans chanted in unison, as they had for decades, "Ultimate Warrior!" Yet beneath the cheers was a quiet tension, a sense that this might be the last time these titanic bursts of energy would be seen live. Colleagues noticed it too, a subtle fatigue, a slower recovery, a heaviness behind the relentless intensity that had defined him. In the backstage corridors, the air was thick with stories. Some whispered about his legendary work ethic, how he insisted on preparing for each appearance with the same ferocity as if it were WrestleMania 6 all over again. Others spoke of his eccentricities, the private dressing room he demanded, the rituals he performed to psych himself into his persona, the intense, almost spiritual monologues he delivered to himself before entering the arena. To outsiders, these might have seemed unusual, even troubling. But to Warrior, they were essential. A bridge between the man and the myth, between 𝗖𝗢𝗣𝗣𝗬𝗥 and the Ultimate Warrior. The night before his final Raw appearance, he reportedly barely slept. His mind raced with thoughts of destiny, of legacy, of the long road he had traveled from a shy, scrawny boy in Indiana to the icon of American pop culture he had become. He thought of the mistakes, the controversies, the betrayals, the highs and the lows. Every feud, every firestorm, every challenge that had tested him both physically and emotionally. And yet, despite it all, there was pride. Pride in his accomplishments, pride in the lives he had touched, pride in the moments that would be forever etched in the memories of millions. The Raw broadcast began as usual, the cameras panning across the crowd, capturing the excitement, the palpable anticipation. And then, the arena erupted. The Ultimate Warrior appeared. The energy was instantaneous, as if time itself paused to acknowledge him. Fans leapt to their feet, chanting, screaming, waving banners, and raising their hands in salutes to a man who had become more than a wrestler, a symbol, a beacon, a living legend. Warriors sprinted down the aisle, tassels flying, face paint gleaming under the lights, every muscle coiled and alive. He entered the ring and the camera captured it all. The fury, the intensity, the heartbeat of a man who had dedicated his life to a singular purpose, to be remembered. That night, he delivered a performance that would be remembered for its raw power and emotion. He spoke to the audience, not as a performer, not as a character, but as a man who had experienced the full spectrum of human life. His voice, hoarse from decades of shouting, carried the weight of his journey. He talked about courage, about purpose, about destiny, and about the importance of living every day with intensity and meaning. To the fans, it was a rallying cry. To those who knew his personal history, it was a window into the soul of a man who had lived both in light and shadow. But the very next morning, the world would learn that this performance had been his last. As he left the hotel, walking toward his car, a sudden heart attack claimed him. The news traveled fast, first a whisper, then a roar of disbelief and grief. 𝗖𝗢𝗣𝗬𝗥𝗚𝗚, the ultimate warrior, was gone. The timing, the abruptness, the shock. It all felt almost cinematic, as though the story had taken a tragic turn written by fate itself. Those who loved him, those who studied him, those who argued with him, all were left to grapple with the unthinkable. The man who had seemed unstoppable, immortal even, had succumbed to the most human of vulnerabilities. In the days that followed, speculation ran rampant. Fans mourned, flooding social media and forums with memories, tributes, and theories. Wrestling colleagues expressed shock and sadness, some reflecting publicly on their complicated relationships with him. The mystery surrounding his death only added to the myth. How could someone so vibrant, so full of life, be taken so suddenly? Was it the cumulative toll of years in the ring, the extreme physical conditioning, the intense adrenaline spikes, or simply fate? In the absence of a clear explanation, stories grew, rumors spread, and the Ultimate Warrior legend became entwined with the enigma of his final moments. WWE responded with a tribute. The Warrior Award was established in his honor, recognizing individuals who demonstrated strength, courage, and perseverance. Yet, even in celebration, there were complications. Warrior had been a controversial figure, known for harsh opinions, public confrontations, and a sometimes difficult personality. Some questioned whether the award's purpose truly reflected the man behind the myth. But for many, the essence of the Ultimate Warrior could not be diminished by controversy or criticism. It was in the energy he brought, the inspiration he provided, and the lives he touched. Family and friends spoke quietly, their memories revealing a more nuanced picture. Cher, his ex-wife, remembered the private moments of vulnerability, the man who cried, who struggled, who longed for acceptance and connection. Vince McMahon recalled a performer who could inspire awe like few others, someone who defied conventional expectations, someone whose eccentricities were inseparable from his genius. Fans recalled childhoods brightened by his appearances, moments of joy and empowerment, a symbol of strength in a world that often felt uncertain. Every perspective added layers to a complex portrait, a man who was at once heroic, flawed, brilliant, and tragically human. As the narrative of his life continues to unfold in retrospectives, documentaries, and tributes, the story of the Ultimate Warrior becomes almost archetypal. It is a story of ambition and intensity, of a man who took control of his destiny in ways both inspiring and dangerous. It is a story of personal triumph and professional turmoil, of love, loss, controversy, and reconciliation. And ultimately, it is a story of mortality, the reminder that no matter how powerful, how iconic, how larger than life, every human journey has a conclusion. The story of the Ultimate Warrior was never just about the bright lights, roaring crowds, or record-breaking pay-per-views. It was about a man wrestling not only his opponents, but the ghosts of his own past. After his initial rise to fame, 𝗖𝗢𝗣𝗣𝗬𝗥𝗚𝗚𝗏 life became a relentless whirlwind, a mixture of unparalleled success, personal conflict, and public scrutiny. As soon as he burst onto the scene in the late 1980s, it was clear that he was different. He wasn't simply another muscular, charismatic wrestler. He was an enigma, a force of nature wrapped in face paint, tassels, and a seemingly uncontainable intensity. In the early days, he was driven by a singular, almost obsessive focus. Every morning began with rigorous workouts that pushed his body to extremes few could imagine. He believed in absolute dedication, in transforming pain into power, and in letting nothing, no distraction, no criticism, interfere with his purpose. His peers often watched in awe and sometimes in unease as he sprinted down hallways, jumped over barricades, or performed feats of raw strength just to maintain his energy and adrenaline. There was something almost ritualistic about the way he prepared for matches, a rhythm that connected him not only to his persona, but to the primal drive that defined him. The wrestling world noticed immediately. Fans were mesmerized by the speed, ferocity, and unpredictability of his performances. His entrance alone became legendary. The rapid sprint, the intense gaze, the unrelenting energy that seemed to surge from somewhere beyond the ordinary human body. In an era dominated by larger-than-life characters and storylines that often leaned toward theatrics, the Ultimate Warrior's raw, unfiltered presence carved a niche that could not be ignored. He became a symbol, a living myth that blended strength, intensity, and mystery into one electrifying package. Yet, behind the paint and the fanfare, the reality was far more complex. Warrior's personality was as volatile as his ring style. He was known for speaking his mind with uncompromising honesty, often alienating colleagues and executives. Conflicts arose over creative control, over scheduling, and over public appearances. His relationship with management was a constant negotiation, a delicate balance between his desire for autonomy and the rigid structures of the wrestling industry. These tensions often spilled into public view, making him a polarizing figure. Fans adored him, but many insiders questioned whether he could maintain long-term success in such a high-pressure environment. The early 1990s marked a turning point. Warrior's career trajectory, which had been meteoric, began to encounter turbulence. Injuries accumulated, and the constant physical and mental demands of wrestling began to weigh heavily. Long bus rides, grueling matches, and the relentless need to maintain a hyper-intense persona took a toll not just on his body, but on his relationships. Friends and colleagues noted a growing sense of isolation. A man consumed by his own intensity, yet struggling to find equilibrium in a world that demanded both spectacle and compliance. The bright lights of the arena were intoxicating, but the darkness backstage was equally formidable. Controversy soon followed. Warrior became embroiled in disputes with the organization he had helped elevate to global prominence. His outspoken nature, which had once been a source of fascination and charisma, became a lightning rod for criticism. Stories emerged of heated arguments, abrupt departures, and public statements that perplexed fans and colleagues alike. There were claims of ego clashes, financial disagreements, and clashes over the direction of storylines. Warrior, however, maintained that his actions were always guided by principle, by a belief in authenticity and integrity, and by a refusal to compromise the essence of what he represented to the fans. Amid these professional struggles, Warrior's personal life faced its own storms. His marriages, friendships, and family connections were often strained, reflecting the broader challenges of a life lived under constant scrutiny. The man behind the mask carried burdens that the public never fully witnessed. The insecurities of a young boy who had faced abandonment, the longing for acceptance, and the enduring struggle to reconcile his public persona with his private self. These challenges were compounded by the physical demands of wrestling. Chronic injuries, repetitive trauma, and years of extreme conditioning left scars that were both visible and invisible. Each match, each appearance, was not just performance but endurance, a testament to the body and mind's capacity for resilience and pain. Despite these struggles, Warrior remained an icon. He returned to the ring periodically, each comeback generating intense excitement. Fans, drawn by nostalgia and admiration, flocked to arenas, eager to witness the energy and power that had defined him. Interviews, appearances, and public engagements painted a picture of a man still fully engaged with his craft, still able to inspire awe. Yet, beneath the surface, the pressures continued to mount. Critics questioned whether these comebacks were sustainable, whether the man could maintain the intensity that had become his trademark, and whether the emotional cost was too high. One of the most challenging aspects of Warrior's life during this period was the tension between fame and authenticity. Wrestling demanded a persona, a character that could captivate audiences and sell tickets. Warrior's persona was extreme, almost mythic in its intensity. But 𝗖𝗢𝗣𝗑𝗬𝗥, the man, struggled to inhabit that character constantly. The line between performance and reality blurred, creating stress, confusion, and sometimes conflict. Colleagues recalled backstage conversations in which Warrior spoke of purpose, destiny, and the importance of living every day with intensity. These discussions, profound and often philosophical, revealed a depth of thought that contrasted sharply with the raw physicality of his public performances. The controversies continued to follow him, with fans and media often misunderstanding the complexity of his personality. Stories circulated of confrontations with other wrestlers, management disputes, and public disagreements. Some narratives painted him as difficult or erratic, but those who knew him closely emphasized his passion, loyalty, and unwavering commitment to his principles. To Warrior, wrestling was not just a job, it was a calling, a platform to communicate ideas about strength, courage, and human potential. Every confrontation, every challenge, every headline was filtered through this lens of purpose, even if the world did not always see it that way. It was during these years that Warrior also began to explore his spiritual and philosophical beliefs. His speeches, interviews, and writings reflected a man seeking meaning beyond fame and spectacle. He spoke of the importance of personal integrity, the transformative power of energy and passion, and the need to confront fear directly. He urged fans and followers to embrace life fully, to confront their limitations, and to push beyond the ordinary. These ideas resonated with many, particularly younger audiences seeking inspiration. They also added another layer of complexity to his public image. A man who was not only a performer, but also a thinker, a motivator, and, in his own way, a teacher. The twilight of Warrior's career was marked by reconciliation and reflection. After years of conflict, he returned to the WWE fold, participating in Hall of Fame inductions and special appearances. Fans were eager to witness the man who had inspired them decades earlier. Warrior approached these moments with intensity, but also with a new awareness of his mortality and legacy. Each speech, each entrance, each handshake with fans was infused with meaning. He understood that his time in the spotlight was finite, that the memories he created would endure far beyond his presence, and that the myth of the Ultimate Warrior would continue to captivate hearts long after his final roar. Yet, even in these final stages, there were reminders of the fragility of life. Health concerns, both known and hidden, loomed over him. The extreme physical conditioning that had propelled him to greatness also left its marks, making the body vulnerable to the sudden shocks of age and overexertion. Colleagues often noted the paradox of a man who seemed invincible in performance, yet deeply human in his vulnerabilities. The tension between image and reality, between myth and man, became ever more pronounced, adding both drama and poignancy to the final chapters of his story. WWE honored him with awards, tribute videos, and a foundation in his name. His wife, Dana, became a public figure for positivity and empowerment, carrying forward his message of belief and inner strength. But as the curtain falls on this chapter, one question remains. How does a man who inspires millions, who seems invincible under the glare of the lights, cope when the world fades and the battles become internal? The victories, the headlines, the glory, they are only part of the story. Behind the screams of the fans, behind the electrifying entrances, there lies a darker truth. And it is a truth that will follow him relentlessly, shaping the choices, the conflicts, and the destiny that awaits in the next chapter of his life. What really drove him? And how far would he go before the ultimate price had to be paid?